The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. I'm Laura Kaminsky, Associate Director of Education for the Humanities at the 92nd Street Y. Do you have sound? All right, we'll try again. Good evening. I'm Laura Kaminsky, Associate Director of Education for the Humanities at the Y. Following the slide talk, Mr. Gehry will discuss his work and perspectives on various architectural issues with Paul Goldberger, after which you will have an opportunity to submit your written questions on the index cards which you received as you entered the hall. During the course of the evening, ushers will collect the cards and bring them backstage. Our guest this evening is Frank Gehry, principal of the firm Frank O. Gehry and Associates, which he established in 1962. The firm's work is varied and includes many building types, most recently the California Aerospace Museum, the Loyola Law School, the Francis Howard Goldwyn Hollywood Regional Branch Library, Santa Monica Place, and the temporary quarters for the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. Mr. Gehry lectures extensively in the United States and abroad, and is the recipient of the Arnold W. Brunner Memorial Prize in Architecture, much better, from the American Academy and Institute of Arts and Letters in 1983, the Charlotte Davenport Professorship in Architecture at Yale University in 1982, the William Bishop Chair from Yale University School of Architecture in 1979. In 1974, Mr. Gehry was elected to the College of Fellows of the American Institute of Architects. Mr. Gehry and his firm have received numerous awards from the American Institute of Architects. His work has been exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art, the Cooper Hewitt Museum, the Paul Cooper and Leo Castelli Galleries in New York, at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris, the La Jolla Museum of Contemporary Art, San Francisco Museum of Art, and the Dallas Museum of Fine Arts, and will be the subject of a major retrospective at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis in the fall of 1986. We are delighted that Mr. Gehry has left sunny California to join us and Paul Goldberger tonight. Let us welcome them both. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, and let me add my welcome. God, this really does work now. To Frank Gehry, who is recovering from jet lag from his trip to New York, which in turn was a recovery of jet lag from a trip to Japan that you ended just on Friday, I gather. So this is all to explain that if he doesn't manage to put together a complete sentence, he's to be forgiven. Why don't we start, as we usually do, with some slides of your work and a few words, and then we'll put the lights back on. Can we have the slides?
I'm wonderful. You're going to want me to move me, too, soon. Oh. Nothing happens. You will operate it? You will operate it? In 1972 at Bloomingdale's, and the slide is in backwards, so I have to complain a little bit, I designed a room made of cardboard, totally of cardboard, the floor, all the furniture. Next. Paul said to be brief.
don't have to be quite that brief, actually.
Thank you. I get involved with materials. That's some kind of idiosyncratic behavior that I have. And so when Formica Corporation asked me to do something with color core, I made these. I actually discovered that the material was translucent in the warmer colors and opaque in the cooler colors. And I decided to make lamps because I knew everybody else would make furniture, and I'm damned if I can't. I have to be different. I have that kind of monkey on my back. And so I made these lamps, and they looked like frozen Noguchi lamps from the 50s. And I got very angry with myself and broke the material into a million pieces and looked on the floor and found these beautiful flint-shaped forms and decided to make a fish lamp. Next. This is the Loyola University Law School in Los Angeles. I was interested in a connection to the downtown. I was interested in being inclusive in creating this campus, and I was interested in creating a campus in the first place. Again, the materials, this is a plywood from Finland that's used for form lumber. And I wanted one of the buildings to look like a piece of furniture. I guess the preoccupation is with a number of shapes and forms put together in some kind of urban strategy, maybe more like a still life. And so that's what this is all about. Next. Inside, those same buildings form a campus quadrangle. And I was interested in the detachment of the pieces so that they not be seen in the context as, if you took a frontal view on this building, it would look like I became a postmodernist overnight. And Bob Stern loves that view. But I didn't see it that way. I saw it as dismembered and pieces that you see in this kind of view. Next. This is my own house in Santa Monica, which did upset the neighbors for a while. It was a sweet little house and had nothing much going for it, except it was the only two-story house on the block. And I decided to make it better, and that one would be able to look into it. Whereas all the other houses on the street, if you go by, they have the shades drawn and you can't see in. I wanted to be a little bit more welcoming and yet preserve the privacy. So I composed these views of the old house so that as a person went by, they would feel that the old house was intact and more important. Next. I have had a fascination with chain link fencing, only because whenever I did a building, I was told that I had to put a chain link fence around it, and I never liked it. I hate chain link fencing. And I became interested in the denial about the material that is so pervasive, and that when it's used inevitably, it's okay. And once I started playing with it intentionally, people got upset, and that interested me. This is the best use I've made of it, hanging it as a curtain and getting rid of those pipes, so now it becomes a fabric, and I applicate fabric on top of fabric. Next. This is backwards too. This is a small house that's under construction in California. I was interested in, and these are in not a good order to explain it, but I've been interested in exploring the one-room building, because traditionally the one-room buildings have been some of the best buildings made in history. And I thought that if I could, even if I had little houses to do, it would be an interesting exploration to explore or push myself to the edge and have to deal with a number of one-room buildings. There will be some slides that explain that better. I was then put in the position of having to put the one-room spaces, connecting them together. And so this is the state of that research now. This piece is actually a cross plan, like a centralized church plan. And the living room steps down and is analogous to the nave. And this hall is kind of like a side aisle. I'm not into religious architecture, it just grew that way. And these are separate bedrooms. Next. This is also in backwards, but the cross plan, this is the dining room, a den, a kitchen, and on the other side, I'm sorry, this is the kitchen is here, and there's a entry back here. This is the living room, master bedroom. So I was treating these collisions of the various parts and interested in those collisions. Next. I used to do houses for people that didn't have a lot of money, and I think I had fairly good, successful doing that. And inevitably, if you get a lot of notoriety, people that have money start calling you. And so this is for a man who has a little money in Cleveland. If you could focus it, it might be better, but it's the beginnings, it's the beginning model, and it won't stay this order and regular. But this is the living room. You drive up a driveway. This is also backwards. There's a snake, which I love dearly these days, building at the entry. This is a swimming pool, bedrooms, etc. And there's a fish pavilion out on the edge. Next. You can see the entry, the snake. Now this project will transform enormously from here. This is like the very first model sketch. We work in models, and I do a lot of sketches, and the guys build models. And this is the first interpretation of my early sketches, and it's not a final design. And so I caution you that it looks very regular here. Next. This is a restaurant that's under construction in California. It's a Mexican restaurant, and I'm using onyx. The entry is white onyx. There's a bar, a little private dining room over the bar that's orange onyx in the background of green onyx. The dining room is down this way, and the roof of the bar has two 40-foot crocodiles that'll become the light fixtures hanging over them, made of tin, and they'll be black. Next. This is the Space Museum in Southern California. It's a, maybe they can focus it. This slide shows the intention. It was, my client asked me to do a starter set building. The main building is behind it and much larger, and it's an existing building. They wanted something that symbolized the kind of issues they were dealing with. And so this is essentially one room, and you enter into a vertical circulation building that's articulated inside, and then you look left and right into these big spaces. I was interested in the sense of rockets and the mysteries of strange factories that make space objects. And this was intended originally to be in my proposal, a Messerschmitt 109 F. The people that run the museum thought that was too warlike, and they countered and won with a F-104 Lockheed that's used in the Middle East right now. and they disguised it by painting it with UN markings. Next. These are in bad order again. I'm doing a little addition to a house in Minnesota next to a 1940s Philip Johnson house. Next. This explains it better. This is a bedroom, a living room, a garage, place for the kids, etc. Next. Venice, California has a funny context. And I wanted to be inclusive, as I said. And so I made this building as a piece of new building that fit into the texture of the existing. This is a bedroom on top, living room and a deck. The wife's artist studio below. The husband is a screenwriter of some note, and when he was a kid he was a lifeguard, and he always fantasized having a lifeguard tower to work in. Next. This is a trellis. Next. Every architect in America of any note has been given large-scale museum projects all over the world. And I felt a little left out. I've been interested in 20th century art for a long time and very involved with it. And so when they started to build their new museum, they hired Issō Saki from Japan. I was very hurt. And they gave me a warehouse to remodel as a temporary museum until Issō's building was finished. And so that's what this is. And the budget was $1.5 million. And it turned out pretty nice. I didn't do very much. And a lot of people, I segregate people by the people that select this as my best work, because I realize they're saying they like it better when I don't do very much. Issō Saki and I have become great friends, so it's okay. Next. This is in Beverly Hills, existing building that went up one more floor. The client, who's an artist, and her family asked me to design a penthouse. We decided to tear off the top floor and build a new place. The symbolism relates to their fantasies. They wanted Jerusalem, they wanted marble, they wanted Gaudi, they wanted a lot of stuff. And I got into it with them. And this was the result. Next. This is the Hollywood Library near Hollywood and Vine. It was paid for by private donor, the Samuel Goldwyn Foundation. You could walk in on center on this seemingly classical facade, I guess, or as close to classicism I get. And you walk in and up, and inside the north wall becomes glass, and you find yourself in a building with this reading room. The two reading rooms are in a water garden behind a wall. You're not aware of that from the outside. But I was here again dealing with the inclusivity of the neighbors, and it's a strange neighborhood. And this is my most successful one in those terms. It'll be finished soon. Next slide. That's the whole thing, total picture. Next. And the final project is a thing that I just did with Klaus Oldenburg. I find I enjoy playing with playmates of other persuasions like Klaus. We went to Venice. We did a project, a performance piece in which I was a performer, Klaus was a performer, my wife was a performer, my kids were in it. Klaus did one of his finest sculptures, as far as I'm concerned. A Swiss Army knife that opens and closes and floats in the canal in front of the arsenal. Next. My name in the program was Frankie P. Toronto, FPT, and I lived in a temple shack that was based on a drawing by Canaletto that had a temple in this area. And so I made this temple shack, and I was in there, and I had a knife, and I cut myself out, and I walked out, and the temple fell down, and I proceeded to give a lecture. My character was Frankie P. Toronto, P for Palladio. I was a barber from Toronto is where I was born, so that's why the Toronto. I was a barber from Venice, California, who wanted to be an architect, pretended to be an architect, and was known to appear in this cafe and give talks on my theories of architecture, which were the real order is disorder, cutting and slicing is the true image maker in architecture, the true form generator in architecture, and that metamorphosis of buildings into fish and snakes was the coming thing. Next. This is my costume. It's a bad picture of it. I had a fish head, and I was a AT&T building with sleeves that looked like columns, and I was very serious, as you can see. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. How is your philosophy different from Frankie P. Toronto? which is the real Frank Gehry?
The real order is disorder, is close to the bone.
Right.
The cutting and slicing is sort of a manifestation of the relationship with Oldenburg. And the metamorphosis, I'm not sure. The fish and snake stuff grows out of a lot of things, like from my past. I don't know if you want to...
Well, in your new monograph, the new Rizzoli book, you make some reference to your grandmother and having carps bought when you were little. Is that really true? I mean, is that
yes.
that? But how did
also
that
when
become an architectonic image? Is what's
Well, the real path to it was you remember the Herald Tribune Revisited thing?
Right.
I did a drawing
in
of
Chicago a few years ago. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I did a drawing of a bird, an eagle, and made up a story about this eagle being the Herald Tribune symbol, and that the Herald Tribune was a
Chicago Tribune, you mean?
Chicago Tribune. Sorry.
We don't like to confuse our newspapers here.
Right. Chicago Tribune was a computer in the head of this eagle, and the eagle was a ride and all that stuff. And I intended to do an Audubon-style drawing for Stanley, which I never got done. It was a bigger task than I bit off more than I could chew. So I was always guilty that I had to do something about that. And I intended to make a column that was 12 feet high as a sculpture. And a house came along where I needed such columns. And I made a model of the eagle. And then I decided to have I needed to know what the next column was going to be. And somehow the fish popped into mind. That's where it started. Now, what I have come to use it for is a symbol of perfection. So whenever I'm working on a drawing and I think that this piece has to be perfect, I draw a fish. I don't think I intend to ever build a fish beyond the fish lamps and maybe the pavilion for the guy in Cleveland. But I have done studies for a high-rise building that looks like a fish.
Fish on end or a fish?
Fish on end, it works very well as a tower.
How does it work?
Well, it's just a big fish, goes up 80 stories.
An 80-story fish.
Yeah.
You haven't been commissioned to deal with a home for Humphrey the whale in California yet, have you, to sort of help get him back to sea? Well, does it sort of, I mean, the split tail sort of provides a sort of base like the Eiffel Tower or something? And then
No, no, the fish is cut before it turns, and it looks like it's coming out of the water, 80 stories or 100 stories. And then the tail goes under and sweeps up and becomes the sculpture on the plaza. So I take care of everything with one fell swoop.
God, that actually...
I mean, I love my artist friends, but I don't want to get near them doing anything around my buildings.
Boy, that is obviously the answer to the sort of the epidemic of Calder and Henry Moore, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, sort of fish. Do you really think you in this Cleveland house, you're really going to build a fish pavilion, though? That's a fish on its side, right?
Yeah, it's like the one I did for Castelli Gallery, the Folly.
Right.
Which would be...
filleted, we might say.
Filleted, right. Yes.
Okay.
Fillet fish, gefilte fish.
Okay. The lamps were a big item, right? I mean, they now are worth vast amounts of money.
First thing I ever made money on in my life.
How many of them did you make?
I think about 30.
Are they all slightly different?
Yes, everyone is different.
And they are now great icons.
I guess.
Yep.
There's one at the Met. The one I showed is at the Met.
Is it the Met?
Right now.
Do you get tired of having your work referred to as connected to the concerns of art? I don't mean sympathetic to art, which is a separate issue, but since you for so long talked a kind of language that is not that different from that of artists, you're very close personally to a lot of artists. In fact, for a lot of the years of your practice in LA, you were probably more associated with artists than with other architects.
Yes.
What has that done to perceptions of your work? Do you think you are in fact perceived as an... I mean, I wonder if ironically you didn't get the LA Museum Commission because in some circles you're thought of more as an artist than as an architect. Is that true or not?
I don't know. The answer, when Isamu Noguchi came to my house once and sat around and looked at it and said, "Mr. Gehry, you're a sculptor," I was very pleased when he said that to me. When friends of mine in the architectural world, if Michael Graves sometimes inadvertently says, "Oh, you're an artist," I get pissed off because it's a dismissal.
Right. That's what I mean, yeah.
And I get that a lot. I get it from Stern, and I get it from a lot of them. I get angry. And I mean, I like them, but I don't, you know what I mean.
Because I think, actually, the astonishing thing about your house is that, and about all your work, is that once you get beyond that initial first impression, it's actually very powerfully architectonic. Mm-hmm. I mean, the house is really about architectural issues, not sculptural issues, whatever Noguchi may have felt about it.
Well, my whole training is architectural, and I think of myself as an architect. It's true. I hung out with a lot of sculptors and artists, and I suppose what's different in my case than in some of the cases, like John Haydick is interested in Juan Gris.
Right.
It's a dead artist. I mean, I'm interested in Juan Gris, but Juan Gris is a dead artist. There are artists living today whose information somehow is relevant, and I've been paying attention to that.
Haydick also, one almost feels that the association with somebody like Juan Gris is too close, and that his work is too literally an architectural reflection of that art. Mm-hmm. Yours seems to be in a much looser and more conceptual way connected to art rather than a literal way.
Well, I try to transform things from, I mean, I can see where the idea started with. I can see that my interest in, not corrugated, but in galvanized came from Don Judd, certainly,
right.
Years ago. There was a turning point for me in the 64, I think it was, or whenever it was, the Jewish Museum show of primary structures. Mm-hmm. Might have been 67. And I tripped over the piece called Lever that Carl Andre did of pieces of fire brick. And I was very impressed with that, in comparison to everything else. And so I guess I went down the minimalism route for a while.
I think something like the Ron Davis house, which you didn't show, but which is that very powerful, abstract, sort of trapezoidal form, is minimalist or not? Would you?
That house grew out of Ron liked the corrugated metal, had seen the other stuff I'd done in corrugated metal, asked me to do a studio, and I'd known him for a while and realized that he was really a two-dimensional painter, and that he could not, even though he worked in perspective, it's fascinating for me, that working in perspective, he could not make a sculpture. He thought of it always as a perspective drawing. And so I had this fantasy that I could take perspective and sort of get him involved with a three-dimensional game. And it never really happened. I always thought he would do the interiors himself. And finally he came back to me because he...
Did it change his painting at all or not?
He went into shock, unfortunately. Two years after he moved in the studio, he stopped painting. And I went crazy. I thought, I've just ruined this guy's career. But he did start making different paintings in the studio, and they were related. You could say they were related to the studio in some way.
Right. What about the whole business of process and unfinished things and collision and disorder? I mean, what do those things really have to do with architecture? I mean, let me ask it in as blunt and direct a way as I can. Yeah. You can have a drink of water first. That's okay. It's why is exposing process? Why are colliding forms, making something look deliberately unfinished? What does that matter when most of the history of architecture shows us finished objects? What should make breaking that meaningful right now?
I work very intuitively, as you probably are aware, and I don't usually explain to myself what I'm doing as I'm doing it, but I feel that we're commenting, all of us, in some way or another, commenting on what's around us. And I have been particularly interested in painting, and I've been interested in the quality a painting has many years later, the immediacy one feels in that painting that looks like the paint was just dried. I mean, a de Kooning painting looks incredible. 20 years later, you feel the energy
making it, right.
And I started to search around for some way of expressing that architecturally. Now, became obvious to me that buildings under construction looked great, better than buildings finished. And I think that's something most people agree with. In most cases, not every. And so I started playing with this idea of the raw structure. In California, we build with wood, stick frame. And I liked the feeling, the immediacy of it, and I tried to capture that. And that was that. And then I discovered that my roots, Talmud, whatever, talk about ideas and process as being strong. I recalled some of that. The idea of collision, it's fairly obvious to me that the most interesting things in our lives tend to be interconnections of unlike forces, people of different ideas clashing.
Process and collision kind of imply each other in a way, don't they?
Right. Yeah. And so I became fascinated with that. And then the one-room buildings being the closest, again, from painting, fantasizing what it's like to be a painter confronting a white canvas and wondering what in architecture is close to that. And somehow the one-room building is the closest I could get to that idea, where the functional issues are sort of very obvious, and you just you're really dealing with what's in your gut, and you're going to put something on there. You got to make your first move, and it's really pretty basic. I then took houses in which there were maybe 6 or 7 rooms. We were doing a lot of small houses, and I thought that by making separate rooms, I would, instead of having each one, the house a continuous form, which I'd been doing before that, I decided to make 6 separate rooms. And then I became interested in how you connect them. And I liked the idea of the awkwardness of the connections and exploring the awkwardness of the connections. So it's a very personal kind of exploration. It probably hasn't got a lot to do with the stuff you're talking about.
I don't know. Why is that?
I'm not sure, but...
Actually, the one-room issue is fascinating. I was just today reading this new biography of Mies that is not yet out, that's coming out very soon, I think for the big centennial show at the Modern. And it talks toward the end about Mies as being the master of the one-room building, in a way. Sort of almost the same, even though an architect who could not be more different from you in some ways, and yet it talks about his most successful things as being one-room buildings, where his pure formal instincts could simply carry the day. But Loyola is really an essay in one-room buildings, except for the big renovated classroom building, but the 3 new structures.
Well, the renovated classroom building actually is not renovated. It's a new building.
Oh, it is a new building. Oh, that's it. So it's all new, right?
Yes.
The whole thing's new. That's right.
But I did, in that case, make a background, a stage set for the little buildings, and maybe got a little theatrical, but I was trying, I do work with clients. I mean, I don't want to give anybody the impression that, not that I'm trying to get any work. I got plenty of work right now. But I just want you to know that I do listen and do get involved with the clients. I'm enough of a voyeur, I guess, that I love this, to see what they're going to do, how they're going to, it's like a chess game for me. I put my move down and then watch the interaction. And so in the case of Loyola, the brief was to do not a campus, the brief was to make a law school. And the discussions with the students, faculty, and administration indicated a yearning for a place. They wanted a place. They wanted a place that's symbolically related to what they were studying. The old building had nothing. This is a law school that is like number 3 on the hit parade in LA, UCLA, USC, and Loyola. And so they felt third. And they wanted something that would be more interesting and more related. And so that's why those columns, and I did it minimally. I tried to reduce the symbolism to $20,000 out of a $6 million project.
I think I haven't think Loyola is extraordinary and probably the only true urban piazza that's ever been built in Los Angeles, or at least since Disneyland, maybe the only true urban place ever built in Los Angeles. But the abstractions of classical elements in those sort of very abstract versions of columns and colonnades and the church form and so forth seem to me to be particularly wonderful in that they explode the sort of dichotomy that is suggested by the modern, postmodern dialectic all the time. In fact, if you think back to the 2 people who were here in the 2 weeks before you, Bob Stern and Charles Gwathmey, neither of whom could ever have done that way, and in fact, both of whom espouse a philosophy that suggests that what you did is absolutely impossible and cannot be done at all. Because the idea that you could take classical form, or maybe I should say take abstract form, keep it abstract, and yet through that abstraction render classical meaning and symbolism without allowing it ever to become even remotely literal, is something that neither the conventional modernist philosophy, which tends to be so reductivist and asymbolic, nor the postmodern stance, which tends to be so much more literally symbolic, seems to admit. I mean, I found one of the most powerful things about it was that it just sort of exploded that simplistic either-or situation.
I felt uneasy, actually, about the columns at some point, because I realized I was getting close to the thing I don't like, which is the direct quotation, the looking
Right.
backwards. I'm real uptight about all that still, but maybe I'll get with it someday. But and I think I played at the edge in some way, but
Right.
I rationalize it, I guess, in this case because of the brief, the symbolic needs of the client and all that stuff. But that's probably pure rationalization. It's interesting, though, that the early sketches on many of my buildings start with historical reference and classical things. If you go through the evolution of my sketches, if you built the very first things, they would be blatantly postmodern, I think, in the terms that people have come to
Right.
use the term postmodern. So
But you pare away then.
I start and I pare away, and there was a perception of me that I was sort of not well versed in history of architecture, and compared to Stern, I'm not by long shot, but. I have spent a lot of time in Europe and looking at the buildings, and particularly Romanesque architecture. And there was a character in the Romanesque churches that I became interested in that was very idiosyncratic, and I think that had a big impression on me in those early formative years. And a lot of what I'm doing, I can relate to that after the fact, not before the fact, but after the fact.
Right.
In fact, the house that's a little church, is clearly from Issoire or somewhere.
Well, it seems to me that one thing you've taken is you're not dealing in primal geometric forms in the sense of the circle, the square, and all that, as some architects have done. But neither are you dealing in literally historical forms, but you're taking historical forms and turning them into simple, basic geometric forms. Sort of distilling the essential simple form out of it in the way that the form of the Romanesque church became that wonderful shape at Loyola, that sort of apse.
Write that down so next time somebody asks me what I'm doing, I'll... That sounded good to me.
Okay. You like that? Okay.
Yeah.
Why is it, though, given your aversion to literal quotation of history, that you were so close to Philip Johnson, to a number of the other people who make that their stock in trade? Do you...
I'm interested in creativity wherever you find it. And, Michael Graves is probably the other pole from me in some ways, in many ways. But he represents one of the most creative architects alive in the world today. And so I support him, support what he does, support the Whitney, support the things he does. I support a lot of people whose work I wouldn't relate to because I think they have a strength and an individuality and a personal, I see it as having evolved in an honest, straightforward, personal way, and it has their stamp, and it's very... I'm very interested in that, so I find that exciting, and there aren't very many people that can talk to each other. And I tend not to be that judgmental, I guess, about stuff like that. Except in my own studio. I get really mad if somebody starts doing anything that gets near to Michael in my studio, even colors. I just freak out.
Are you hard to work for?
I'm very demanding, I think. And I'm not very clear. I'm a person that doesn't articulate what I'm after very clearly in the process. So the best people that have worked with me best is a young guy from Cooper Union, Paul Lubowicki, that worked with me for 5 years. And we would sit together and work, and I don't think we talked five words in 5 years. Somehow, there was a synchronization that worked for me.
Let me ask you about a couple of specific jobs. One thing you showed one slide of, but not much detail of, was Santa Monica Place, the big shopping mall in Santa Monica. It was done for the Rouse Company, although it bears very little resemblance to Faneuil Hall or South Street Seaport or whatever else. How is it that, first I could ask, how is it that a conventional shopping center developer would come to you? How did you deal with the gulf between
this is
much
an
of your
awful
work
question.
and what, I mean, weren't they trying to push you all the time into doing something that wasn't the way your work is, or not?
All of those things. Let me.
How did it tell the? I mean,
I'll
tell
tell
the
you
story
some-
of it.
I'll tell you the background.
Okay.
When I got out of school, I started doing work for.
I asked this, I guess, because if you just think back to Stern and Gwathmey, or Michael Graves, whatever, all of whose work is at least one step more conventional than yours, and in the case of Stern, many, many steps. Mm-hmm. Yet they've always been considered too far out for any shopping center developer to touch. So, well, how is it that this marriage between you and Rouse could happen?
Years ago, I ran into some Rouse people, and Jim Rouse and I met and found that politically and in humanistic terms, we were very much in sync.
Right.
We're both major do-gooders, I would say. I just wanted to do good for the people, you know, and he did too. And so we found each other, and I would have, I did several jobs for him. I did the first buildings in Columbia, Maryland, and Meriwether Post Pavilion, and a number of things that I was personally not in a very formed personal state, vocabulary-wise. I was younger. I was grateful to have the work. I developed a pattern of working with them in which there was a give and take, in which I was pliable, in which I was compromising, if you will. And looking back, it is. But I was always fighting. It was always agony for me. Until I got to do the headquarters building in Maryland, which I got interested in the interiors and the lighting systems, and I sort of let Jim's thing about California and trellises, I just made a minimal building, hung some trellises on it, made him happy. And I made it a jagged edge. It wasn't as good as anything I'm doing now, I think, but there were a lot of research into lighting, acoustics, and things that I got very involved with. At that point, we'd had a pretty good relationship, but never worked on a commercial job before.
Right.
Now, my early beginnings in architecture were with Victor Gruen, so my do-gooder instincts were very much satisfied working for Victor Gruen in the early years because he was rebuilding the city and rebuilding. And the swan song of building the shopping center in the suburbs sounded like a great idea and solved all the traffic problems and all that stuff. So I had a lot of experience in those years doing shopping centers and multi-use projects and high-rise buildings, all those things. And I directed a lot of them and worked on a lot of them, and I'd hate to mention the names of them. They're really horrible buildings, and I don't want to, I didn't control the design of them. I was merely a part of the team. Rouse jobs were part of that.
I see.
They didn't know me. I wasn't too far back in the back of the room, but Santa Monica, my own town, had a competition for a shopping center downtown. And I talked to Rouse and said, why don't we enter together? And we won. That's how that happened. I had a much better project, much more suitable for Southern California, much more relaxed. This was the first Rouse Company project out of state for them. They were a little nervous. They wanted it, so they sort of pushed at me. I think it became clear, it was while I was doing that I did my own house. And my own house became a foil politically in town, because I would go to these planning commission meetings and they would say, "You're not going to do that here." And they were always grateful that I wasn't going to do that here. And so I would get these approvals. They were always... The president of the Rouse Company, with whom I'm very friendly, lawyer, came to my house for dinner one night after Santa Monica Place was open, and he said, "I don't understand this house." He said, "But if you like this, you don't like that." And I thought about it for a few weeks and agreed with him, decided he was right, we've outgrown each other, and so we don't work together. They've asked me, I like some of the people, but I think we have outgrown each other.
You just really feel you've gone in different directions.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't think what I do now applies to what they're trying to do.
Let me ask you about another job that isn't yet built, perhaps not even yet designed, but that intrigues me in terms of the problem it presents. The Child Study Center at Yale, which is kind of a psychiatric institute, is it not?
I'm real late on the designs,
Oh.
so I'm feeling very guilty.
I don't mean to add to your
Can I
guilt,
go
but
back?
in fact, if we can get a pad, you can maybe catch up a little bit right now.
That's in many ways one of the most exciting possibilities. When Bartlett Giamatti, the president, interviewed me, he asked me why I was more qualified to do this building than the others, and I told him I was clearly more schizophrenic. So he selected the others. But the staff wanted me.
Did he in fact choose somebody else or not?
Yeah, he did. But there was a voting system, and he was outvoted, as I understand it, and now we're happily working together. I'm very interested in that problem. I've done work with I've been interested in similar problems, and have some friends who are notable in that area as psychologists, and have had over the years discussions. I designed an office for a psychologist in which the issue, it was my period when I was leaving all the ceilings bare, and this guy was treating really heavy-duty schizophrenics, and he told me I couldn't do that because they would freak out. That had to be
They would lie on the couch looking
had to be more normal. So maybe there's an irony here that the building I'm going to have to design for Yale is going to have to be more not relaxed, but more orderly in a sense, because it is for people who are having problems with that issue. It's for adolescent schizophrenics, most of them, 2/3 of whom are likely to do themselves in if left alone. I've approached the problem. It's at Yale, it's on the hill near the medical school, it's in a transition area to the ghetto. The program was for a box in the middle of this site with a wall around it, and I decided that would make it look like the loony bin, and that people coming here would feel that they were being brought to the stereotypical loony bin, and that in recent years anyway, the tradition for these facilities is to build it out in the suburbs where there's light and air, and this is coming back to a central city, almost central city problem. And so I was able to, in my first meetings, change the program, attack it, change it, so that the ground floor entrance on the main street is now the Yale Co-op. And it's a shop, and it's very accessible on the ground floor. And backed up to that, we're putting the work adjustment programs of the inmates, so that the philosophy of the facility is that the from the moment somebody enters that facility, they're pointed out in every way possible. And I felt that the architectural program as written didn't complement that. So we changed that whole thing. We've now made a village, which is not unlike some of the spaces I showed you, in which the program areas that are meeting rooms and occupational therapy spaces and dining halls are separated, like in the Loyola thing, and brought out and made part of a courtyard.
Is that almost like the Screen Actors Guild idea too, where those little structures were within a larger frame?
Somehow, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the whole question of how, which I think you touched on, of how calming an environment it should or should not be.
Well, I took some of my friends who are very expert in this field, who know my work intimately from years, and I said to these people, of all the work I'm doing, I've built, which, I mean, certainly my house is not an appropriate place to start for this facility. What would you say? And in most cases, it came up that the little house on the rooftop in Beverly Hills, the village, the light, the air, was. I was strongly urged by these people to start there, and I got concurrence on that from the people who are running the YPI. So it's not. So I don't walk in and jam something down their throat. I'm really spending the time doing the research, spending the time with the people, and trying to develop. I'm very interested in developing a facility like it's never been done before. I mean, the nearest thing, there are two facilities, one by, oh God, I blocked his name, in Chicago.
Tigerman?
No, not an architect, the shrink.
The shrink. I don't know.
Anyway, Bettelman. Bruno Bettelheim.
Bruno Bettelheim.
Bruno Bettelheim did one in Chicago. And the Bettelheim building is very sweetie pie. It's all the rooms are sort of chintz and sweet. And it's very overbearingly sweet. And I think
cloying almost.
I haven't seen it, but I've seen pictures of it. Yeah. And I think that's wrong. That feels wrong. And the other one that was done for Meningers is kind of spread out. It's not an in-city place, so it's not exactly the same.
Well, then there's the Richard Meyer building too in the Bronx, which is philosophically a whole other way to go.
Yeah, I don't. Is that the same program?
I think it's a slightly different program. It's
Yeah.
actually it certainly does accommodate people with a history of mental trouble, but it's not precisely the same program. But some of the same issues come into play I mean, that the sort of super sleek thing that looks like it could be the Institute for Advanced Study or the headquarters for NASA or whatever. There's real reason to question how appropriate that is as an environment for the schizophrenic or the mentally ill or whatever.
I would question that.
Yeah. What about a job you talked about a while ago? I don't know whether anything came of it. The Manhattan Bridge in New York, to do some work there. Did that ever happen?
I never got paid.
By the city government?
Yeah, I got an award for it from the Arts Commission.
Right, but they didn't build it, did they?
I thought I would send it back, and
nothing got built.
No, it's the mayor and his. There's a very innovative traffic commissioner, David Gurin, in your city, who apparently had seen progressive architecture and had some urging from Margot Warnicki, I guess. When he was asked to put a chain link fence on the Manhattan Bridge so that they could convert it to a pedestrian overpass on the south side of the bridge, they called me as the master of chain link and asked me to do this thing. And so I proposed hanging a curtain 20 feet high, similar to the Santa Monica thing, and I left it very blank and showed it at the Arts Commission as kind of a scrim, a beautiful kind of veil that solved the problem. It was a little more expensive than just an 8-foot or 12-foot chain link fence. the commission asked me why I didn't put letters on, like in Santa Monica. And I said that I thought New Yorkers were much too sophisticated for me to pull a trick like that. And so they were begging for the letters.
I see, okay.
Those are the kind of games I play.
That actually gives me a perfect entree to the first question. We'll turn to your questions now. Do you think your buildings could work in New York? And would you in any way change your style?
I've designed a few buildings for back here. I'm doing some work in Boston now. I think that obviously, technically, you have to deal with weather problems in a more rigorous way, and so that would lead to a difference in those connections. My own house is the most outrageous building I've ever done technically. It leaks like a sieve, but it's my house, and it leaks on my head, and I paid for it, and so I feel it's okay. I explained and played and pay for my sins. And about the next iteration of that technology was much more sophisticated and less leaky. There was only one leak in the next house. We got rid of that. And by the third building using that technology, I solved it for California. I think in the East, I would approach it maybe similarly. I'd certainly deal with the technology. I would deal with the same issues because there's a chaos in our world that can be tamed, I think. I have this idealistic notion that you can build a building and somehow, by association, take charge of an area. And I just saw that in Japan, by the way. They've done it all.
You want to talk about Japan for a minute, since you've just come back? Since you're still on Japanese time anyway.
Nobody told me how beautiful it would be. I knew that as a student I studied classical Japanese architecture. I knew all the shrines and temples, and so in a way they were anticlimactic to see those. But the thing that took me totally by surprise was the Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, the way they've built their cities. They've dealt with the scale issues in a most incredible way. I mean, you can walk down the streets if you haven't been there and see little houses next to an 8-story building, next to a high-rise. Somehow the texture of it all, the individual buildings are not great. There's nothing outstanding as you have here, but the overall picture really works in an incredible way. I couldn't believe it.
In Tokyo only or everywhere?
Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe. Strangely enough, Kyoto, which was supposed to be the one I was supposed to love the best, I didn't.
You liked the least?
I liked the least.
Contextually, what have you drawn from the Los Angeles culture in your work? This is all, I guess, still relates.
Well, there's a freedom there because you're not likely to get a building that's next to anything of any substance historically. You're not, to put it mildly. So you have to invent. I mean, you've got certainly an economic constraint, and you got gravity, and you got all kinds of other things, building codes and earthquake codes. But there is a freedom that you don't have here, that you certainly don't have in Europe. You have it here when you go to the suburbs, but somehow the architects here don't translate it.
Right.
They don't take that license when they get out of town. They somehow are so oriented to the center that it seems not very many play, except for Sight maybe, or people like that. I think the main thing is the license and the freedom and the ability to explore ideas. And there's a lot more jobs, there's turnover, it's quicker, it's fast food, it's make it quick and get rid of it and down to the next one. It's kind of, there is that attitude out there.
And actually leads me to another question about whether your work has, I'm trying to find it now, I don't remember the word, here it is. How do you think your buildings will be perceived 10, 30, and 50 years from now? Will they stand the test of time? Do you think you are, you'll like this. Do you think you are the Gaudí of the 1980s?
To answer the first part first, my use of inexpensive materials comes from the opportunities that were given me. I started out with these very low-budget buildings. I got some charge from the Judd thing, as I said, and Andre and people like that.
Right.
And Jasper and Rauschenberg. And the notions of using those materials and making this responding to this fast food type of aesthetic was very logical and it evolved pretty clearly, I think. I went a few years ago to Nevada to visit artist friend Michael Heiser, and we took a walk in the desert, and he said to me, Frank, you ought to consider using more permanent materials, because he said, when you build something that lasts 2,000 years, eventually somebody will like it. So that made an impression on me, but I don't think it's changed very much what I'm doing.
Well, I know, you're going to Onyx in one of those things you showed us.
I am getting clients that are a little more affluent, and I think it probably screw up my career.
I don't know. It somehow I suppose it would be reassuring to realize that every rich client in the world doesn't go to Bob Stern. I mean, it's sort of do you think it important that a building be visually appealing? And if so, what determines visual appeal for you? I'm not sure the second part is that answerable, but the first part strikes me as a sort of seemingly simple question that isn't so simple.
No,
actually.
It's not simple, but I'll try and answer it. It's a certain kind of beauty or sculptural excitement or what that is part of whatever my personal search is or my personal vocabulary. I perceive it as, I get very excited, I perceive it as beautiful. I think what I'm doing is making nice places for people. But I tend not to, it's maybe my Holocaust. I share with Peter Eisenman a Holocaust paranoia. Somehow the tutti-frutti, cutesy, sweetheart buildings, and sometimes I accuse Charles Moore of this, bother me because they don't seem to relate to what's really going on. They're sort of leading you down the path. I equate it. This is a super exaggeration, but it is the way I think about it. It's like when the Germans painted those pastoral scenes on the trucks, they took people to the gas chamber. That's the super exaggerated feelings I have about that kind of sweetness and beauty. And I know that I'm always amazed when I see a Moore building that it's not about that. But the early...
Well, the better ones aren't.
The better ones aren't. And
also, his own rhetoric, unfortunately, leads you to believe it's more cute than the building really is necessarily.
Right. But the exaggerated issues that he sometimes raises, which I guess people in the Rouse Company talk about that kind of stuff in South Seaport and Faneuil Hall. That seems like it's a commercialization. It's kind of an abuse to me. And so I'm more interested in the contentious kind of reflection that we have to deal with really. And I don't know if I get close to it, but that's what I'm trying to do.
Well, you're interested in architecture that is not superficially easy, I think is what you're trying to say. Although, the question, it's interesting to perceive how it does or does not come across, and that, let me give you two questions that sort of raise that. You can answer them both together. One of them, I suppose, speaks directly to this by saying, I still am not sure how Mr. Gehry feels about a social political philosophy on improving the quality of life for us, plain folks. And then we have to look at and be in his works. For example, Loyola and the library. A not entirely dissimilar question, without the editorial comment, is, can you say something about the political social implications of your work, possibly in relation to the political social implications, a lot of political social, sounding like exam questions, all of these, possibly in relation to the political social implications of postmodernism and other of today's trends. I think you've in effect been speaking to that, I guess.
Yeah, I have.
Do you want to say anything further or not?
Well, I did admit to a do-gooderism in my life, and I am, if you want to locate me politically, probably closer to the left than the middle. I knee-jerk that way, and I believe in all the causes, and I vote for all the candidates that believe in all those causes. And I think that I do in my work hold to the principles of those beliefs, and that, but one of the overriding and most important things for me is not to talk down to anybody. I learned that a long time ago, that wasn't very polite and very nice to do. I found in my 20s that I wasn't getting very far as a public speaker for political causes, and that I wasn't very good at it, and that I wasn't very good at fundraising and organizing along those lines. And so I decided that whatever I was going to do, I'd have to do it in my work. And I think that the kind of buildings I'm doing grow out of that. I mean, the uneasiness I have doing houses for rich people, even though I'm doing them and enjoying it, I still have a kind of guilt about that. In the case of Loyola, the users love Loyola. I visited whenever I go there and take people around. Occasionally we'll walk into a classroom and the classroom breaks into applause, and I'm very pleased that they recognize me, they identify with me, they follow they've had parties and asked me to explain stuff. I spend a lot of time with the students, with the users, and we're in sync. Santa Monica Place, which I say is heavily compromised, is one of the, but nevertheless has many of the characteristics of my work, the natural light and the quality of the space, is very much liked by people. So I'm not sure where that question, I mean, I'm not sure that that's a relevant question.
I think actually the fairest thing we could say is that the slide perhaps sold Loyola short in a way, in that I think it didn't communicate what an intensely likable place Loyola in fact is. I mean, not to suggest that it is in any way superficial or light. It deals with the issues we've been talking about as seriously as any piece of your work does, but it also has a quality of great amiability to it at the same time.
But I would like to say that I don't try to make those connections to the people. I know a lot of my friends talk about that being more accessible in terms of buildings being less abstract and more humanistic by being less abstract, and I don't relate to that kind of discussion very well. I think that that some of the buildings that are supposedly less abstract are really quite abstract, and that those words really don't have much to do with the connection to people, in my opinion. I don't, and to try and consciously make a connection to the whole world and to get everybody to like you in one fell swoop seems like the antithesis of what somebody should be doing. After all, it's just one person. My output in a lifetime ain't going to bother very many people, I promise you. And I think it's more important to have a number of characters freely be able to express and make their little mud pies in their corner, and then to have somebody herd you into line, like in some of the schools. A friend of mine teaching at Irvine painting school a few years ago was so overwhelmed with that the system had created so much funneling of these students into one way of approaching painting that he became so discouraged. One day he asked them to come with their paintbrushes and a little can. He lined them up against the wall, asked them to bend down and paint a line along the baseboard and oink as they went, one following the other. And each one of the students, 40 or so students in this class, accommodated him, and he left the room and never reappeared, left them oinking and painting this line. So that image, I think there's room for a lot of different kind of language. I don't think that we don't defy the laws of gravity. You can't beat the building department, so the buildings have to be fairly safe. If they leak, you're not going to get many jobs. And so there's a kind of control system already that's in operation. And I was very taken in Japan by Tadao Ando's buildings and the orderliness of them, and I can be seduced back into that kind of aesthetic, the Kan kind of simplicity and straight. But I think there's room for a lot of different stuff, and it seems to me more important for students and architects to try their own expression. I mean, you're going to find out soon enough whether you're not going to do any more of it, and that the governors are very strict, and you're going to get knocked off the place anyway if it's not interesting. So,
good. Let me give you a couple of rather quick and specific questions, since we've talked so much about larger issues. The Aerospace Museum. Is it true that the jet fighter attached to the side of the Space Museum was supposed to point down as a reaction against the Air Force?
I originally had a Messerschmitt 109F, which I think is, of World War II, sculpturally is one of the most beautiful planes. Yes, I had it turned down as though it was strafing. That was my commentary. I also proposed, they want to exhibit missiles, Minutemen and all that stuff. And so I proposed a missile garden in which the missiles were lined up like the Parthenon, creating a temple on a podium. That one didn't fly.
As it were.
And the plane got turned upright by Lockheed with the F-104 because they didn't want their plane to look like it was crashing. But yes,
okay.
I am given to those kind of commentaries. That's where my political stuff creeps in.
If you were the client, who would you commission other than yourself or James Sterling to design a new museum in New York?
Holy cow. Who's out in the audience? Oh, God. Somebody out there asked that, huh?
Whether it was the chairman of the board of any existing museum, I'm not sure. Someone else asks what you think about the Graves addition to the Whitney, so if you feel like answering that one
Okay,
first.
well, let me
you can
answer
do
that one because I am very, as I said, I'm very supportive that kind of effort, that kind of brilliance that this man has. Even though in many ways I find his vocabulary strange to me. It's the antithesis of what I would do or what I would feel. But I think it's becoming better and better. It's becoming, as he continues to work, becoming more and more convincing. I haven't seen Humana, but it seems to have many characteristics.
Have you seen San Juan Capistrano?
Yes, yeah. And I like parts of that. I like the spatial experience, which I took me by surprise, that because I always thought of Michael as doing rooms,
right.
And there was a spatial experience in San Juan Capistrano that was
it was a real axis.
Great, yeah. And beautiful, yeah. So I'm very supportive. I'm also somewhat outraged that architects in New York have taken off against him because it's like killing your brother in a way, because some of the architects who've taken off against him are also creative people, and they should understand that he's doing something personal and special, which is the best use of his time. And recently I was in Cleveland, where I'm doing this house, and I visited the museum there, and I saw the Cleveland Museum, which Mr. Breuer himself completely screwed up. He took a nice old classical building, absolutely destroyed it, and so since he's the senior role model, he in fact showed Michael how you do it. If somebody thinks he's screwing up the Breuer building, I think he's enveloping it into the fabric of his. And while I could be critical of parts of it, I think it's a pretty exciting building, and I would hope that everybody supports it. I don't know who you select. I mean, I'm very bad at selecting. I was going to say Sterling until you said not Sterling.
I don't know why the question said not Sterling, but so they did. Okay. This is kind of fun.
Peter Eisenman, I think.
God, okay. By the way, there's a question that goes all the way back to sort of yellowed paper going back 2 weeks regarding the Gwathmey lecture, asking if the de Menil house of Mr. Gwathmey seen in our first session was destroyed by fire. It was not. It was the house of Francois de Menil's sister that was destroyed by fire. That's about half a mile away. This also contains a question for you, proving that it was not actually 2 weeks old. Do your structures exceed or only meet the earthquake statutes and codes? How conscious are you of those when you're designing?
Very.
Okay. We're almost out of time, and it's also very warm in here. Here's a nice one to possibly conclude with. It's a 4-part question. You can choose any or all parts, one from column A, one from column B.
I didn't answer yet whether I want it to be Gaudi.
Ah.
I just remembered.
Well, this one actually will give you a chance to do so, because it says, are all your works your fantasies? How did you choose architecture? What work would you most like to do? And why are Canadians so crazy and so successful in the United States? I'd like to hear you answer the last part. Never mind the rest.
Crazy. I don't know. It's pretty cold up there. We get to the warm climates, maybe. Successful? If successful in dollars, you're on the wrong track. It's not. There's nothing about that.
Mortimer Zuckerman, I suppose.
I'm not involved with. In fact, those Canadian developers clearly steer a path away from me, and they're right, actually. I think I would agree with them, because they're about things that I'm probably not about. But how did I get into architecture is more interesting. I came out of high school in Canada, moved to Los Angeles. I was about 17, I think, and was a truck driver for a few years. And thought I wanted to be a chemical engineer, and then I thought I wanted to be a radio announcer, which thank God I didn't pursue because I don't have the voice for it. But I remembered as a child, I was in that period where you're thrashing around trying to figure out, damn it, what am I going to do? I want my parents to be proud of me. I want people to, what am I going to do? I'm not going to be a truck driver, and I got to do this. I got ambition. But I didn't know what I wanted to be. And I remembered that as a child, my grandmother used to bring home the cuttings from the wood shop to light the wood stove, which she used. And they'd be these bandsawn curved forms, and we would sit on the floor and make cities. And I somehow kept having that image of this play. And it's great to have somebody in your life who is supposedly an adult that will allow you or teach you and allow you the luxury of play that as an adult, somehow to show you that it's okay. And I think that finally I believe strongly that the creative process is a childlike exploration, and it's difficult to explain it and question it. And somehow, because of this experience that kept reappearing, and I started taking architecture classes, and for the first time started to succeed. Before that, I took art classes as well, and before that, I must say I had a hard time, except for math. I was always good in math. English class, they used to put me out in the hall. My essays were awful. I was the worst.
But you really felt at home when you started architecture.
Yeah. And the transition from art to architecture happened because of a professor, a ceramics professor of mine, who somehow had an insight that I didn't have. And his house was being designed and built by California architect Soriano. Mm-hmm. And Soriano used to appear in a black suit and a black beret, and this great sort of symbol, macho guy, really appealed to me that an architect could do that kind of stuff. Somehow it was very seductive, and so a number of things made the transition for me.
And here you are.
Here I are.
Good. Our time, and here we are. Our time is up. Thank you all for being here this week. I hope you can join us next week. And thank you very much to Frank Gehry.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.